Hello, welcome to the next Preachers cohort video. In the last video, we talked about the need to tell stories, why it's important in our sermons, and today we're going to look at the basics of how to tell a story, or how we can improve. And again, these are the basics. Thousands and thousands of pages have been written about this, but these are a few simple principles that we can take to grow in our storytelling. The first is to become masters of the structure of stories. Now, this might sound obvious to you, but it needs to be said. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end to a story. That's it. In the beginning, you're setting the stage. Where are we? Who is there? What's going on? Something like Billy walked to the store to buy eggs. In the middle of a story, you have to answer one simple question. What's wrong? The party was starting in just a few hours, and Billy needed to bake a cake. Finally, in the end, you resolve the tension of the story. You don't necessarily need to put a bow on it and explain everything away, but you must give the listener enough information to move forward and begin making connections. As you begin paying attention to stories, watch for these movements. A complicated Academy Award-winning stories still have these basic three movements of a beginning, a middle, and an end. As you begin to tell more stories, you might feel overwhelmed by how much you can tell. Well, you can tell how good your story is and your sermons by looking at what you've cut. Every preacher must wrestle with what's most important from this text. So answering the question, what will I say? What's most important from this text for these people? That's the who. And then perhaps the hardest question is, what's most important from this text for these people at this time? So outline your story with these basic movements, get it out of you, and then get ready to cut. Maybe you're wondering, well, how do I know what to cut? I really love this part, or this is a big deal to me, or whatever. A simple filter to run all of your stories through is this simple principle. Always show and rarely tell. Always show, rarely tell. Here's what I mean. Great stories transport the listener somewhere else. They create experiences that are real and emotional. You can close your eyes and you can see yourself there. Somewhere along the lines, we came to believe that stories had no place in theology. And the irony of this is the Bible itself. Jesus' ministry is filled with theological questions and interactions. And more often than not, Jesus doesn't open up his big, thick theology book. And a lot of times he doesn't even open the Bible. What he does is he answers these deep theological questions with stories. So someone comes to Jesus and says, Jesus, what is heaven like? And he looks at him and says, well, imagine a man who's walking through a field. And you know how the story goes. Some of his friends come up to him and says, Jesus, we're scared. What's going to happen? Is everything going to be okay? And Jesus doesn't say, don't you know it's a sin to be afraid? Haven't you memorized these verses? Instead, he says, hey, look out over there. Do you see the birds? Do you see the flowers? You know how much more I love them than you? Jesus could have just told those people what heaven was like. He could have said it's more valuable than anything. Instead, he shows them what heaven is like through a story. He creates room for them to open their hearts, to imagine, and to make connections with this idea Jesus is sharing with them. He could have told his disciples, hey, don't worry, I'll take care of you. Instead, he shows them how he cares for his creation by telling them to look around. Good storytelling shows people what's going on. We paint pictures with words. We don't simply offer easy answers and explanations. And again, this is not because the answers are not true. It's not because the answers are not important, but rather that over the long haul, answers don't work. Answers alone are not enough to transform our souls in the deepest places. Why? Because answers themselves rarely appeal to the deepest parts of who we are. Once we know something, we feel safe and we think we have it figured out. And we don't allow it to sink down into the deepest core of our hearts, our desires, our longings. So how do we move forward in this? Well, there's the practicalities of mastering the structure of stories, a beginning, a middle, and an end. Begin paying attention to some of your favorite stories. Go reread the first book you fell in love with, or watch one of your favorite movies and try to define these transition points in the beginning, in the middle, and the end, or how the storyteller answers these questions. What's going on? What's the problem? And how's it going to work out? I think a harder way to move forward, but a more powerful way to move forward in becoming people who show stories. We don't just tell stories, we show people what's going on. We don't just tell them what's going on, is to pay attention to our own lives. And think of it this way. God has blessed us with 5 senses. Most of us think that we can just think, that thinking is where the really spiritual stuff happens. But if God's blessed us with all of these 5 senses, we do Him a disservice. We do ourselves a disservice if we don't attend to each of them. We must learn to know how we feel, what we see, what we smell. And so here's real practically what this could look like. I encourage you guys to start carrying a journal around with you, a little small journal you can fit in your pocket. And maybe at your lunch break or right before you go to bed, sit down and just answer a few questions. Questions like, what did I feel today? What did I see today? What did I smell today? And learn to pay attention to the world around, because if you can't see what's going on, you won't be able to show it to others. So I hope that's helpful. Take some of these principles, begin paying attention to stories and paying attention to the life that's going on around you. See you in the next video.